So I'm going to be demonstrating a portrait in watercolor. And before that, I'm going to be showing you some of the basic techniques of handling watercolor pigments. Right here, I'm going to be taping first my watercolor paper, which is just cellulose. And I'll be using only one pigment as a basic demonstration of those techniques. So burnt sienna it is. So I have 2 wells of water, and here I'm going to be adding the pigment to the water and just applying directly on the paper. Okay, so but with just less pigment. So now I'm trying to increase it, the pigment to the water ratio. So this is 1:1, and it should be darker. So this consistency, okay, so and then I'll be adding more. And of course, the value of this watercolor is going to be darker and directly getting the pigment out of the pan. And this is what it looks like. Okay, so this is more pigment than water. Okay, so these consistencies are we could equate them to these tea by tea, coffee, cream, and honey as a way to gauge the ratio between pigment and water. So these are what would look like, and then I would be washing my brushes from time to time if I just to get some better uh, mixes. So right now, so the application of these onto paper like wet on dry, so there's no it's like directly applying the watercolor pigment just like that. It's called wet on dry. So the next type of application is a bit more different later on. Wait, so I'm adding some pigments here to make this part darker. So the brush is a multifunction brush. It's if you think about the brush, the sable brush that I'm using, which is number 12. It's meant to use as a transportation type of tool. So right here, I'm transferring water and I'm transferring pigment onto the water on the surface. So this is called wet on wet. While the surface is wet, I'm adding in the pigment. I just put the clear water first and just adding some pigments again to make this part darker. There you go. So if I directly get from the pan um, and not much water, and so this is called dry on dry, and here you can see the grains of the watercolor paper. Not it's just hitting the upper part of those grains, and here I'm doing a really pure pigment type of application, and you can see these dry screeches. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in the future and how where to use that. So When you store the brush after use, every use, you should not put it on your water well, but rather on top to dry. So right now I'm doing a simple penciling of Justin Bieber. Hmm. Okay. Anyway, here I'm doing the outlines in proportion to what I see from a picture reference, just to show you. Okay, so that's my picture reference there on the left, the nose, and this is from a previous demonstration, of course, if you want to know more on proportions. So right now I'm applying clear water and avoiding some areas, but mainly, the entire face of the subject here is uh, has water on it at a certain ratio, of course, not too much water and not too little water at the same time. So right now I'm doing a wet on wet application as we demonstrated, and I'm just putting where I think it's going to be much more darker, and this is the general underwash. So this is called an underwash, um, and here I'm just carefully. Now you can see on the left panel, you can see the reflection of the water. And it's important to note this every time you try to apply. And there you go. So when it starts getting to a matte state, that means it's gonna be less of mobility for the water pigment to just spread this the just like what you saw just now. And the wetter it is, the faster the like how it blotches like that. So I washed my brush, dried it on a tissue paper, and tried to lift it. This is what they call lifting. If a pigment is too much and you don't want that being covered with pigment, that part. So I'm just lifting. I'm drying my brush again and just picking up some of the uh, excess pigment. So right here I'm doing this uh, on the eyebrows. So the left part of the portrait is trying to it's drying. So not to worry. So I'm just working as fast as I can. So this part of wet on wet has only a window of about what up to 3 minutes. So it's important that you work fast and you put where the pigments are. You can see the reflection. It's still some areas because of the warping of the paper. It has a pool of water. So anyway, the nose part has been saved. That because I'm planning to do something with that area, and then part of the left chin has some white area that has been reserved later just to define that jaw. Right now, I'm trying to show you a technique where I'm going to be fuzzing out the edges of the watercolor puddle. So that's like one of the shades. Okay, this is that after the entire thing has dried, probably about 10, 10 to 15 minutes. And so I'm softening those edges, right? So as you can see here, I'm defining the nose by just looking at the reference and really just mimicking what I see. And then damp with a damp brush or a semi-dry brush, you can fuzzy the edges just like I'm showing you. Okay, the tip. Uh, yes, and there you go. So I'm using the fine tip, and I'm just adding a bit more pigment to the surrounding eyes there. Yes, spreading that, and I sometimes use my dry finger to push some of the pigments in the direction that I want, and then I'm trying to define the lips now. So currently, it doesn't seem that it doesn't um, look like Justin Bieber as their photo reference, but these are the underwashes or the undertaking of uh, the preparation of that. So I'm building this very carefully, very diligently, and I'm making sure that their proportion, their shape of these elements are correct. The values of the pigments are correct. So here I'm doing the the darkest parts now, just to contrast everything. And you have to keep in mind that the pigment is gonna lose 20% of its vibrancy when you first apply it, and then later on when it dries, it becomes a bit more duller. So by 20%. So that's just a rule of thumb. And you always go and work from light to dark. So right now, I've shown you the techniques that the application first is wet on wet, and usually if there's a lot of water, the with the ratio of the pigment, it's a bit more lighter, and then I move on to something like wet on dry, and then smoothing out those edges, and then and then the last part would be dry on dry. So I switched to a a smaller brush here, which is a number 6, as opposed to what I was using just now, which is a number 12. Now I'm applying that dry on dry that I talked about. So there you go. So more pigment than water, you can see. So now I'm on my last stages of this portrait. So I'm mainly doing dry and dry, and there you go. Sometimes I do the wet and dry on some parts which I haven't applied on. So the hair becomes like the last part. And there you go. So I hope this taught you something here. And yeah, and I guess that's it. So I'm doing a bit more of those details, and lifting some of the parts there, like that outline of that watercolor as the damp brush and tissue paper, and by lifting. Anyway, I guess this ends the tutorial, and thank you.